Welcome to Defund the BBC. My name is Calvin Robinson, and joining me this week is radio presenter, political journalist, newspaper columnist. She is the presenter of Weekday Breakfast radio show on TalkRadio. I am, of course, talking about my good friend, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Julia, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. I'm saying good morning. I'm so used to saying good morning because my show's in the morning. I don't know how I've got time to do this, doing all the things you say I do.
No, it is weird being on the other end of the camera to you. Good morning to you, Julia, this time around.
Thank you for letting me join you.
Now, it's been in the news this week that the BBC are going to be sending enforcers round to essentially intimidate and threaten over 75s into paying their TV licence fee. But of course, the BBC is describing this move as a customer care visit. Julia, do you agree this is disgraceful by the BBC?
I think it's insane by the BBC, and they're going to live to regret this. What's the point of sending these people around? It's either to persuade, cajole, harass, harangue, bully people into paying their licence fee. We know that virtually all of the people who are over 75 who are now required to pay for their licence fee, who don't claim pension credit, have already done so. It's only a sort of 200,000 or 300,000 who haven't. I've got a funny feeling those people haven't just forgotten to do their paperwork. I'm pretty sure these are the sort of people who do all their paperwork very assiduously and have decided they won't pay it or they can't pay it. And on either grounds, I'm not entirely sure what the BBC thinks happens next, because at the point at which someone says, no, I don't want to buy a TV licence, thank you very much. It's a tax on me having a television based on me funding the BBC, and I don't want to fund the BBC anymore, which they, in my view, are entitled to say. At what point then is the BBC going to say, oh, well, never mind? I think you'll find when an 85-year-old grandmother to 4 is dragged into magistrates' court and refusing to pay a fine, and then ends up being sentenced to prison or something, that's going to backfire horribly. And I think the BBC are crazy to go down this route.
It is crazy. I feel like it's because we're returning to normality now that they're slipping back into their old tactics of bullying the elderly on the doorstep. And it's not just the elderly, they go after women as well. Most of the court cases by the BBC in the magistrates are taking women to court for not paying the licence fee. What's going on with the discrimination there?
Is it discrimination, or is it just more likely that people who aren't able to pay at low incomes? And again, licence fee is a pain for a lot of us, but it's actually a lot of money for an awful lot of families living on the breadline. And in a lot of those cases, it's the homeowner the home leaseholder who gets done, and that is largely on their incomes. It'll be women, a lot of these single parents, and others who are registered as the homeowner, and they're being targeted. I just think the BBC has got itself into a terrible muddle here. It took over that dodgy deal with George Osborne when he was Chancellor. In return for their licence fee increase, they would have to take over dealing with the over 75s licence fee. And they're reneging on a promise on this. Look, you and I probably differ on this. My parents are in their late 70s and perfectly capable, more than capable of paying for their licence fee and indeed their own bus passes if they ever got the bus. And I really object to people who have had good earnings over their life on good pensions, getting off scot-free on these things. But the reality is the cost of getting this licence fee in from every single pensioner or means testing it doesn't make sense. And I just think the message this sends out when you've got executives of the BBC earning silly salaries, and frankly, no one has a clue, including the people who work for these people, what the hell it is these people do for a living to justify these sort of salaries. And when you've got so many people working at the BBC, I just think it's absolutely crazy that they think, well, what can we do? We can't fund our services unless we start charging, 85-year-old grannies for the licence. Rubbish. They could get rid of a bunch of their channels. There's no public service from Radio 1 even anymore. They're not doing anything original that the commercial channels couldn't do, or indeed pirate radio isn't doing. It's an absolute nonsense. They don't need to have goodness knows how many channels and magazines and all of these different things. They could just go back down to the core public service broadcasting, which I would endorse. They could cut the licence fee and still keep it free for over 75s who can't afford it. I don't know why they're not being told that's what they need to do.
I actually do agree with you. I don't think elderly people need to be subsidised in the most part, but it is a promise that was broken. And they're saying they need to chase these people for the money while also spending 100 million on diversity and splashing out on celebrities. It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. And again, it's just the feeling that people have when you had a BBC which was seen to represent the nation and was seen to be neutral. For years, any major event, it was an election or any royal family wedding or death or major event, you turned to the BBC. You would get good quality broadcasting. It would be politically neutral. It would be truthful. It would be fact-led, and that's what you expected. And I'm sorry, but they simply don't do that anymore. I think BBC News is pretty unwatchable most of the time right now. I mean, Sky News have gone down that route an awful lot as well. It's hectoring, it's finger wagging, it's politicising, it's propaganda, it's pushing a world view, and sort of telling the viewers and the listeners, you're not very nice people, are you? Because of the way you vote and the way you think. This is what you should think, whether it's immigration, Brexit, lockdown, climate change, whatever it is, trans issues. This is what you should think. I don't want to pay a tax, which is what it is, to pay for someone to hector me in my own home. Thank you very much.
I entirely agree. And one story you might have seen this week was George Galloway, obviously standing as a candidate in Batley and Spen, his fiery interview with the BBC in which he slammed the broadcaster on air for turning his interview into a Labour Party political broadcast. Julia, do you agree with George on this score? And has this been a recurring issue for the BBC?
Well, it's a terrible thing if you have to agree with George Galloway on any subject whatsoever, isn't it? Not a man with whom I share a lot of love. We even when working on the same radio station, happily blocked each other on social media. Very, very little time for George Galloway, as I think an awful lot of voters feel the same way. But he's right on this issue. And the fascinating thing, and look, I've known this for years. I've done lots of work at the BBC. I go into Question Time. Okay, that's not in the BBC offices, but I used to go in quite a lot of time before I became persona non grata. And walking through the BBC offices, certainly after the Brexit vote, you're just looked at. I mean, if I don't know, a sort of Rose West had walked through, they'd have given her nicer looks, and it's sort of this view that they have that they are neutral and above everything and above politics and somehow better than everyone else, more knowledgeable, more thoughtful than everyone else. It's simply not true. They live in an extraordinary bubble. I think isn't like half of the copies of The Guardian sold to BBC journalists in their offices. They live in this tiny little bubble where they think they represent the ordinary British voter because they don't know anyone else. Their entire social circle feels the same way about everything as them, whether it's Remain or lockdown or the Tory party or anything else. They just live in this tiny little bubble. They think that they are totally in touch with the British people, and they just have no idea that these strange figures they do vox pops with are actually far more representative of what the ordinary Briton thinks. You and I, most of our views, far more representative than what most people think, and yet they think we're very questionably right-wing, and worse than that, far right, I've been called on a BBC station before.
Absolutely. It's the groupthink mentality that's the problem. And we've seen this again recently. Newsnight presenter Emily Maitlis has once again been caught out by her employers for breaching BBC impartiality rules on Twitter. However, like most journalists, she seems to escape with another slap on the wrist, meaningless slap on the wrist from the BBC. Julia, why do the BBC think it's acceptable when impartiality is such a key component of the Royal Charter?
This is it. This isn't preventing someone having free speech. This is fulfilling your contract of work. Your employment contract at the BBC requires you to stick to the BBC Charter. And the BBC, again, very different from, say, what I do or what you do, where we are employed to give our personal opinions. I have to say my personal opinions are never party politically based. I know that people often seem to think they know how I vote or what I think on of different political parties, but I'm genuinely a floating voter, and I give praise or criticism based on what I think and nothing to do with any allegiance to any party or any politician. But there's no doubt at all, Ebony Maitlis is not allowed to do that. Gary Lineker, not allowed to do that as part of their job. But if you have the correct views, the majority view of the BBC staff, in fact, the almost unanimous view of the BBC staff, then it's absolutely fine. If Emily Maitlis had tweeted something in her many tweets. And by the way, I like Emily Maitlis. I think she's a great journalist. I really like her as a person. But if she had tweeted something supportive of, I don't know, Brexit or any other so-called contentious issue, but on the wrong side of the debate, she would be severely reprimanded and possibly out of her job. The rules just don't apply equally on both sides. I keep being told on Twitter that I've completely made this up, but on 3 occasions when I've been at the BBC, someone has come up to me. On one occasion, the cameraman who'd just been filming me and said, completely agree with you on all of that and Brexit and other issues. But for God's sake, don't let anyone else here know because I'll be out of a job. And now they're sort of joking about being out of a job, but they are so embarrassed to admit, fearful to admit that they don't have the correct BBC views. They think, as we've seen in academia and in many other fields, that actually that will damage their career prospects. This shouldn't be happening anywhere. This shouldn't be happening in any organisation, let alone in a media organisation, let alone one we are all required with the threat of prison to pay for.
Absolutely. And MPs have expressed their anger at the BBC for publishing classified information from Ministry of Defence documents, which were found at a bus stop in Kent.
Yeah.
Would you say this is poor journalistic practice by the BBC? And instead of publishing selective quotes from these documents, they should have just handed them over to the authorities?
I'm going to go journalist in my heart here and say that no, if you can establish you can use selective quotes without actually betraying a national secret, then a security secret, then I think that it's perfectly reasonable to do so. I'm sure they took a lot of legal advice, and of course, at any point, of course, the government could have actually stopped it. They would have obviously been asked for a comment beforehand. So no, I think that it was perfectly responsible what they did, and I think, frankly, there is a public interest in knowing that this has happened, and that we think that what happened was the senior servant either left a bag or lost a bag which had these documents in. But again, if senior civil servants are either taking these documents out of the MOD and walking along the street with them and then being so careless with them that they end up being stolen, taken, lost, and then dumped behind a bus stop, I think we have a right to know.
I'm not sure I entirely agree on that one, but this is just a good instance of you showing your balance and you're not actually out for any political agenda.
I'm also a hack. I love a good story.
And so last week, a mother came out and attacked the CBBC for their damaging trans messaging, suggesting that the broadcaster, as well as various charities, were responsible for her teenage son being groomed into taking hormone blockers. Julia, as a mother, do you think that children need shielding from some of this trans lobby content on the BBC?
Oh, absolutely. As an adult, I think we should be shielded from it. I think an awful lot of it is an absolute nonsense. And that's not being transphobic. I'm sorry, if there's a hill I will die on, it's that men cannot become women and women cannot become men. A man can want to live as a woman and want to be called by a woman's name and legally have their identity changed to be a woman on their official documentation. They can wear what they want, dress how they want, behave how they want. Welcome to the world, live your best life. I welcome you, I support you. I would absolutely defend your rights to do that. However, the teaching of children and the indoctrination of adults that's going on as well by organisations like Stonewall, Mermaids and others, this idea that men can become women and trans women are women and trans men are men, I think is in the face of biological fact. I think it's Orwellian doublethink. But when it comes to telling children, a child that's, a little girl who wants to have short hair and play with cars as opposed to have long hair and wear a pretty dress and play with dolls. Well, my daughter played with cars when she was younger. She's still a girl. I never questioned her gender identity or her sexuality or anything. And I wouldn't have she been a boy wanting to play with a pram either. These are incredibly rigid notions about what a man is and what a woman is. I mean, they are set somewhere in the 1950s, as far as I can tell. I grew up in my primary school years wearing my brother's hand-me-downs. It didn't make me into a boy. I was still a girl. I just think these are very strange ideas to foist on anybody, let alone young children. And the evidence is really clear that while someone at a very young age could understand sexuality, perhaps, and know who they find themselves attracted to, and I know lots of gay men and women who said that it was only the age of 6 they felt that way, and felt that they were different, for want of a better word, than many of their peers. But the idea that a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, whoever, could have this idea that I was born in the wrong body and that I need to change my body to fit my mind, I think is really, really damaging. And we've had that recent High Court case, and thank goodness, brought by Kira Bell, incredibly brave case to bring to say, I transitioned, but I shouldn't have been allowed to transition. I was a child, I didn't know. And we've had so much evidence coming out that so many people who do transition discover that from a young age that it isn't the solution to all of their problems, and that actually it can make things a lot worse. And I think that what happens at the Tavistock clinic and is still happening, and some of the guidance that is going out about children these days, and in terms of the hormone blockers and the treatment given to them, I think hopefully in a couple of years, but definitely within 10 years or 20 years, we're going to look back on this as the most extraordinarily outrageous form of child abuse. And if I were a medic at the Tavistock, I'd be wanting to pack my bags pretty sharpish, as a lot of them have done because of this. I think this is one of the most outrageous scandals, and it's happening before us in broad daylight. It's not like grooming that's going on in Rochdale that happened late at night, out of sight, out of mind. This is happening in broad daylight, often in front of parents and teachers and trained medical professionals. And I think it's an absolute scandal. And it is not transphobic to say that. It is not anti-trans people. It is pro-children to say that.
I entirely agree. And instead of, supporting young people, we're encouraging them to mutilate their bodies and make lifelong changes. And it's not acceptable. It's not okay.
No, and rendering them infertile. The idea that any prepubescent child or prepubescent child could make a decision about their fertility at such a young age. I mean, if any girl or boy came to a doctor under 18 and said, I'm heterosexual or I'm gay, but I decided I don't want children, I'd like you to tie my tubes or to give me an operation so I can never have a child, the medical professionals would refuse. On no basis would they do that. And yet these people are prescribing drugs which render young people infertile. I think it's a national disgrace.
I entirely agree. And I think we're seeing now, I'm digressing, but we're seeing now people saying they're transracial as well. And the woke are eating themselves alive because they're saying, well, you can't change your race. You are what you're born with. That's your biology. And they're breaking down their own logic. It doesn't work. The trans argument
we had that with Ollie London this week. He refers to himself as them. Ollie is a boy's name, so I'm going with he. Them refers to plural. He's not more than one person, therefore he's going to have to pick one, he or she. I'm not bothered which. Choose whichever one you want, but I'm going with the boy's name, he. He claims that not that he now looks Korean, like a member of a Korean boy band, but that he is Korean. And people say, this is outrageous, you can't transition your race. And yet we're told in the other breath, a man can transition to be a woman and a woman to a man. I would have thought that your entire biology, the hormones, your reproductive organs, everything that's happened to you in the womb onwards, is a rather more substantive thing to try and change, than mere skin colour. Surely, I mean, if skin colour is only skin deep, why on earth can someone not say, you can say you're a white woman, maybe I can say I'm a black man. I mean, but then all these words become meaningless, don't they?
They do. It's just nonsensical. People can identify however the hell they like, but they can't change their fundamental biology.
And they can't tell us that we have to agree to. We can be polite, we can be respectful, people can be protected under the law, absolutely in favour of all of that. But you don't get to tell me what I believe and what I say. That's the difference.
What I don't get about the pronoun argument, because we don't use pronouns in front of people anyway, because that's rude. We use people's names. So they're dictating what we should call them when they're not even there.
I got in trouble doing an event at Oxford University for a bunch of students, and one of them got very, very cross with me because of my preferred pronouns in my Twitter bio at the time, which were she, her Imperial Majesty. Yes. But this young man was very unhappy about that and thought it was transphobic, and I told him I thought he had to get a life.
Now, Julia, both you and I were at the Freedom March last Saturday. It was amazing. We helped cover it for YouTube and other social platforms. However, one group was very clearly absent. Journalists from the BBC were not present. Do you think the reason for that is because they couldn't find any violence or extremists to help support their narrative? I
mean, the BBC were covering protests on Saturday, just not the really big one with something with which they disagree. They were very much present when it came to demonstration pro-Palestine. And I think there was another demonstration involving another country. There was an Extinction Rebellion demonstration as well. Oh no, they were all present and correct for those demonstrations, which involved a few hundred people. The one that involved what is estimated from, obviously, Richard Tyson, we were doing some filming with him from his helicopter above, give or take 100,000 people. That apparently didn't warrant any mention. And again, unless there's a riot at the end and the riot police go in and abuse and the like, they're not really interested. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to attend, and to take loads of photographs of the people there and videos of the marchers, the wonderful good humour, the incredibly ordinary people who were there. Just, there were some anti-vaxxers, of course there were. That is people are entitled to have that view. It's not one I share, but they're totally entitled to have that view and to march and have their say. The vast majority of people there were ordinary people who just want their lives back. And I don't know why the BBC doesn't think that's worth covering. If it was a march to get Britain back into the EU, they'd have had their Glastonbury team there. There'd have been 2,000 journalists covering it. And again, this is just another example of the BBC pick and choose, not just what they think is news, but what they think you should know about. I spoke to an aunt of mine who follows news very avidly the next day, and she said, "What did you get up to on Saturday?" I said, "Oh, I was at the Freedom March, the anti-lockdown march on Saturday." She went, "Was there? I didn't see anything on the news about that." And I said, "Aha, you wouldn't have." And it was, for all intents and purposes, a news blackout. And when there was coverage, the Guardian and others, they mentioned it, and even some of the BBC coverage, they put all of the marches that happened into one, even though, the few hundred people at each of the other marches were nothing compared to the 100,000 marching through Hyde Park, Regent Street, Oxford Street, Whitehall. I mean, just absolutely packed. You could barely move for mile after mile. They put them all in together, and they picked out very specific things like anti-vaxxers. They picked out the two people who had pro-Trump banners out of all the tens of thousands of people. It's not journalism. What they do is not journalism. It is propaganda. It is dishonest, and it's unprofessional.
Could not have said it better myself. Julie Hartley-Brewer, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and please keep promoting common sense.
We do our best. Thank you so much. Always good to join you.